Welkom to ons program Dit en Dat. Dit is een program waar met verschiedenste mensen geredet wordt om verschiedenste thema's. We hopen dit een interessante program voor jullie is en dat het een zegen kan zijn. Dit en Dat wordt uitgemerkt en uitgeschakt bij de Brigj 105.9 FM uit Elmer, Ontario. Wanneer jij iemand kan, waar je glauben een interessante persoon wordt zijn, te met winge holang hebben, bitte laat ons weten. Schick ons een e-mail to radio@mcson.org. We wensen jullie een gouden en gezegende dag, wo immer je nu doet zijn. Nu wieder met den winge holang voor vandaag. Vorige zondag hadden we gelegenheid gehad om den Woorden filmgeschichte bekijken, Where the Cottonwoods Grow. Dit was een bijzondere geschichte vol verschiedenste momenten van de mennonitische volken is, wat beyond een gouden lachen mjuk, en dan op een krakse schwinn troon in de jongnan bracht. Dit met een tal plaats in de film, wo aansiedelen de tieren van de omgeving nog niet zo recht kenden, en eine familie een schmokke tier gevangen had, en de spelen damit, brachten dort in huis nan tot de nacht, wils dat wir nur kalt in Manitoba, und tieren zichzelf te schützen, müssen sie alle taub in eine Gebiet schlupen, warm te blijven. Aber mulz als de diese Tier in de huis nan bracht even nacht, den nächsten Smarries hat eine von de doch wel een beetje te winsch met dat Tier gespeeld, en op eims hoofd den Tier zijn zeil ab en spratzt in de stoef nan met een enorm starken geruch. Ich glaube, jeder von uns wird auch weten, was von Tier dit gewast wäre. Und aber andere Tiden wären so eine trüge Momenten. So ist eine Tid in Fort Dufferin, wo Ansiedler ein Stadt haben müsst wachen, ehe sie wieder reisen können, in das Jahr 1875, und dann beinahe 6 Weg wären 30 Kinder gestorben. Wann durch verschiedene Kirchengruppen wären, wird umtragen deuten, doch in dieser Stadt, diesem Moment, kämen sie alle taub en wilden einladen uit van de 12 om de verste zijn met deze zaken. Zo zijn de mehrere Geschichten van de mennonitische Erfahrung, während sie nur Manitoba abreisten. Onze vergundene Geschichte bewijst, wo stark en voll Glauben onze Veräldern gewast wären, en wat sie alles durchgesagt hadden nu Niederlande in Manitoba, zoals de East Reserve, wat nu wordt bij Steinbach-Ram zijn, en ook de West Reserve, wo Altona, Winkler en Rhineland is, aan te siedelen. Filmmaker Dale Hildebrand wie ook bij dessen top komen gewast on zondag en neemt tijd om vragen te beantwoorden en wie ook wel eens gewast om wat tijd neemt te met mij spazieren voor onze Wingeholang. Hij kon niet Plautdietsch reden, so ons Wingeholang is in Englisch. Aber hoffentlich kann je genoeg davon verstehen, dat je doorheen komen kan van alles wat we am geredet hadden. We hadden van veel verschiedenste geredet. Een paar van die dingen met een talen van waar Dale zelfs hergekommen is. En hij zegt dat hij in Zuiden Manitoba opgewassen weer, wat dicht bij de US-grens wordt zijn, wat te jane tijd wordt als de West Reserve gekend zijn. Hij had zich dessen project genomen, wils am janke dat mal een ware filmgeschichte merken am zijn ine veräldern, de Mennoniten. Als hij in zijn zesde, weer einschrijven is, aanvangen met dessen project te schaffen, die het niet lang bij de Platt Foundation en de Manitoba Foundation bekwamen om te helpen. In ganzen die het 1 jaar dessen film fertig te maken. Durch onze Wingeholang reden we ook meer om de verscheidenheid tussen de Mennoniten van Manitoba en de wat nu Ontario gesiedeld hadden. En we reden van wo de mennonitische volken wie den Brigj gestreden hebben, met den talen steden zoals Paraguay, Belize, Mexico, Bolivia en sogar China. Dat had ik niet mal gewusst. Mehrere van de Geschichten, wat in dessen film metgedeeld werden, stammen van de doelgeschreven Erfahrungen van de jaren wat dit zelfs erlebt hadden. Diese vangen zij in steden zoals de Manitoba Archives, Library of Congress en ook de European Archives. Durch diese Untersuchung fangen sie morach nach de original Schriftsteckplan von ein Schap, wo mennonitische Völker mitgereist wären in das Jahr 1875. Diese Schap hat Dale mit einem Computer frisch gemerkt und dort auch in den Film nachgestellt. Geschichtenforschers nemen ook part aan deze project om de waarheid van dat informatie uit te zoeken. De film zal in meerdere steden vergebracht worden en jedes Mal als de stad wo het gewezen wordt, ganz veel mensen. Meerdere van die wat uitkomt dat te watchen, blijven danach een stoot nur her om mij op te vragen en ingeholing te gaan over de film. Eier deel dessen film ook, wie hij een bed aanzage gewaast als irgendwer morag nog interessiert wordt zijn in zo'n film moest het zijn. Hij had zich niemals erop uitgemerkt, wat van positieve antwoord hij van de mensen wordt krijgen. De film wie ook via zondag in Paraguay gewezen geworden, wo de sprek in geschreven Hildebrand overgezet weer. Zij schaffen ook damit, dat het in Germany zal spelen, en een part wordt opgesteld zum gewezen worden in Zurich, Zwitserland, bij Anabaptist 500 Conference, wat zal on mei de 29. 2025 zijn. Er wordt ook een beetje van gereed, als het wordt zelden in andere spraken overgezet zijn, zoals Spanisch, aber moet zijn wat de mensen nu vragen doen met de tijd. Nog wat zo weit weten ze niet als het in Plautdietsch wordt aangeboden worden. De plan van nu is dat de film in meer steden over Canada bewezen zal worden, zoals de in Elmer gedaan hadden, en dat zal dan ook wieder uit dem land te andere landen gebracht zijn. Wanneer je niet gelegenheid hadden den film aan zondag te zijn, dan is de gelegenheid dat te kijken. Hier bij MCS waren er een paar DVD's zijn, en dat je ook van de Mennonite Historical Society website te kijken. Dit is maar een korte overblik van de dingen wat ik een deel van gereed hadden. Hierover is de volle ingeholing in Engels. Dankzij te deel voor zijn tijd hiermet, en dankzij te al die wat je toeherken doen. Where the Cottonwoods Grow bewijst de mennonitische geschichte van erfolgrijke wandeling uit Imperial Rusland uit Oekraïne nu Westen op toe. Een bijzondere reis wat mennonitische volken doorgezet hadden, sterk aangebleven werden en vol hoop blijven.
When we tell stories, when we hear stories, they root us to a certain place. They root us to a certain group of people. They root us to where we've come from. But the stories that our ancestors tell root us to a specific past, specific events. They root us to a people, and they root us to ourselves.
In the summer of 1874, the first contingent of Mennonites were destined for North America. They departed in multiple waves, from the steppes of the Russian Empire to the Promised Land, on a crossing that would test their faith, their resilience, and their community spirit in ways they never could have predicted. To reach their final destination, it would take 7 weeks, 11 different trains, 5 ships, 2 wagon trains, and more despair than any could have ever imagined. Children were born en route, and many died. There was no turning back, and no stopping the tragedy that continued to test the very fabric of their faith, as shelters had to be built before the cold set in.
There are many who tell the stories and write the books of history. Our past is reflected in everything we do, because we are what we sow.
Welcome, Dale Hildebrand. I just finished watching Where the Cottonwoods Grow, and that's quite the amazing documentary.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You did answer this question while we were watching it, but I'm still curious. Like you said, it took you a year to put it together. It seems like that was a lot of information. How did you even start the process?
We discussed about doing a Mennonite documentary for years, and my first project, my first screenplay was about the post-Bolshevik revolution of the Mennonites and their experience at that time. But it was so huge and mammoth that I'd never get it financed, sort of thing.
So you did do it, or you thought about it?
It's on a shelf.
Okay.
But this project, I did a picture in Italy. My wife's Italian, and she says, you got to do something to commemorate to your family as well. So I wanted to do something on the Mennonites, and my sister suggested let's see if we can get some funding. And she's a novelist and a writer, and so we sort of coordinated our efforts. And then the Platt Foundation came on board, and then we got the Manitoba Foundation on board. And it just sort of seemed like naturally it was meant to be. The story
Everything
needed
fell
to be
together.
told. Yeah.
So you said you're like, so from the story from your family. So what is your history? So you are from Manitoba?
Yeah, I grew up on a Mennonite farm in southern Manitoba. It's in the area which is historically known as the West Reserve.
Okay.
It's about 4 miles from Emerson, between Emerson and Gretna. So it's right along the American border. And then there was the West Reserve and the East Reserve. And the East Reserve is where the Mennonites originally landed in 1874. So in 1875, the following year, they started going to land further west, and that's why they migrated into the West Reserve, which was known to have a bit more fertile land, not as stony and not as many trees.
So when you say West and East, what are they known as today? So today, if you wanted to go to the East Reserve or the West Reserve,
if you go to the East Reserve, you're thinking Steinbach.
Okay.
And you're going to the West Reserve, you're thinking Altona, Winkler, Rhineland, all that whole area.
Okay, those names sound familiar. I've never been to the area, and after watching this documentary, I definitely want to go. Is there a big difference then from the ones who immigrated to Manitoba versus, like, let's say, the Ontario group?
Yeah, so the Ontario group, they're the Swiss Mennonites, and there's other groups of Mennonites, but the ones I'm originally thinking of was the Swiss Mennonites who came across 100 years earlier. So they would have been through Pennsylvania up to Ontario.
Okay.
And
so did all these pockets come from Swiss or like Switzerland and then kind of separate?
No, Anabaptism began about 500 years ago this year. So there was a lot of persecution that took place. A lot of them migrated to other countries. And one of them was Holland, for example. Yeah. And from Holland, they would have gone over to Prussia because there was a lot of persecution in Holland. And once they got to Prussia, there was more persecution. Russia got taken over by 3 different countries, and it turned into Poland. And, so at that point, they needed to move as well. And Catherine the Great, Catherine II, heard about the Mennonites, heard that they were industrious and stuff like that. They wanted to, in a sense, colonize the steppes of the Ukraine, because that's where the Cossacks were, and they had no control over the Cossacks. They wanted control.
Can you explain what's the Cossacks?
The Cossacks were the people that lived in the steppes of the Ukraine, and where much of the war is taking place today. Okay. And so that's the same region where many of the Mennonites settled as well. And they stayed there for a couple of 100 years. Then they were told that their privilege to not be conscripted to the army was to end. And that's when they decided they had to move from there. Okay. Whereas the Swiss ones would have came, I don't know exactly this, but more directly from Switzerland to the United States to Pennsylvania, sort of thing, to Ontario. Okay. And their language, I remember when I first came to Ontario many years ago, I'm thinking, okay, these are Mennonites. Why do I not understand a single word of what they say? I not a single word I couldn't understand. So my Plautdietsch is very different than what they have to say. And even your accent from going from Manitoba to Mexico and Mexico to here is different than the Plautdietsch that takes place in southern Manitoba or Saskatchewan.
That's so crazy. So it's like Mennonite is not just like it's very broad. There's so many different pockets of the way it kind of developed culturally.
Yeah, you got to think in that same era in the 1870s, they came to the West, but also a lot went to China.
Oh.
What? Yeah, exactly. So it's really the stories that, and you got to think in the countries later, you got Paraguay, you got Mexico, you got Belize, you got Bolivia,
they've kind of spread a little bit all over, right?
Yeah. So they're everywhere.
In your documentary, you use a lot of stories taken from journals.
Yes.
Were most of those, I think you said you got it at the archives?
Yeah, we got those from the Manitoba archives, but we researched archives around the world. And like literally Library of Congress to Manitoba Historical Society, their archives, to Europe. We found the original blueprints of the ship that we built. It was in a shipping yard in England, and it's the first ship the Mennonites took across in 1874, and we rebuilt it in computer CGI imagery, and that's the ship you see in the movie. completely made it from the blueprints into a new reality, a new world.
So a lot of how you pieced this together, was a lot of it done through journal entries, or were there other parts that you kind of took into consideration when you put this together?
Yeah, so we did a lot of journal entries. I really wanted to bring in the lore, the stories, and not just the historians. However, I had many historians approve things. You know, I wanted
they
them,
went over it and kind of.
Yes, I want them to check, and they brought material to the table, and I wanted all parties to be happy, but I also wanted to be honorable to the Mennonite coming across, but honorable as well to the Métis and the Indigenous peoples. So I really tried to not just capsulate, but sort of show the sort of that the Mennonites actually depended on the Mennonites and the Indigenous people when they arrived, and how they helped each other. And I think there's colonialism is a very complex story, and I didn't want to bury my head in the sand with it, but I also wanted to honor all sides of the story. There is innocence and there's non-innocence involved in it, and it's a big story, and we try to tell it with a sense of courage and honor at the same time.
Yes, because to avoid it or to ignore it is to ignore a huge piece of history.
That's right.
A lot of that happened is the way it kind of shaped how the country is today.
Yeah.
I know Anna Bergen, our ED, was asking a question earlier that she thought maybe I could pass along to you. But did you find any documentation, any information on how the different faiths kind of interacted on the boat? So did they do things as a community, or did they have their separate, for the funerals that happened or things like that? Very,
very good question. You got to think that the Mennonites, the delegation that came across in 1873, the year before, that scouted, there was 12 scouts.
Yeah.
And they were from regions all over the Imperial Russia, Ukraine, Prussia, I think even Holland, but there was not just Mennonites, there were 2 of them were Hutterites.
Okay.
So, and they came from different church backgrounds. They had different belief systems to a degree, as you know. So when they came across, I think there was different services in different forms, but also I know, for example, in Fort Dufferin, when they landed in Fort Dufferin in 1875, the year later, there were 30 deaths of children in 6 weeks' time.
Wow.
So they were quite distraught. And they voted in a leader from one of the churches to sort of be the leader, sort of thing. Okay. So they did join forces at times, but even though they were different churches, and they did support each other. And then they still continued on to make different churches and so forth, so forth. Okay.
So I'm curious, was Plautdietsch a language that they were speaking? Was that something they took with them when they immigrated? Or what was their main language that they spoke in? Because I'm assuming they would have to do English, French here. So do you know kind of how that worked with the language barriers?
Well, I'm far from an expert, okay? I'm just a filmmaker
just
guy
curious,
trying to tell a story. But what I do somewhat know, a lot of them didn't speak Russian, for example, all right? They spoke their language that was from their community. Many of them had never left their community, never had ever seen a ship or a train before, never mind travel 20,000 kilometers on them. They'd never seen a ship or train. So they were secluded. They also were never open to the diseases that they ran into in every port, sort of thing. So they were secluded. So they had their language, Plautdietsch, but they're also, you got to think, at that time, how was it affected by the other people in that region, right? So a lot of these came from Holland over to Prussia, as I said. And Prussia, you got to think, there was a lot of influence there from Vikings to whomever. And that was a whole Viking trade route up the Dnieper and that sort of thing. And then when they came to the steppes, they had their own language, but there were many different communities that came into Russia because Catherine the Great offered them land or incentives to come there. I think it was 175 acres and stuff like that, or something like that. Yep. Anyways, it wasn't just Mennonites that came there. There were Jewish people. There were, all these different things. And you got to think, there are certain Jewish words that are very similar to Mennonite words,
I did not know that.
Yeah, and there was a moment where because the scouts went in advance to scout North America, they didn't ask a very renowned lawyer or judge or something of the region. They didn't ask permission. So he was offended. So the next year, he was going to create a lot of trouble for them to migrate. So what happened was a Jewish rabbi brought in a Mennonite, some of the leaders of the Mennonite, and one of them was Abram Dirksen.
Okay.
I believe it was Abram Dirksen. No, sorry. What is his name? I forget it. Wrong name. Anyways, he brought several of them together to a party because he knew the judge was going to be at this party. And he brought the Mennonites there and he got them to speak to each other. And the judge let down his defense. And he stamped some
like approval.
Yeah, he had to stamp something, and they got their approvals to be able to migrate.
So then he was able to kind of help them get over that potential issue, so that there wasn't. I mean, there was a lot of problems along the way. But
yeah. But I mean, But back to your question about language, I think it would have been affected by many people, just like Veronica or
Veronica.
Yeah. So if you think of that, you have some that have cottage cheese in it, and some that have vegetables and fruit and stuff.
It's got to be cottage cheese.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reason for that, apparently, some of the peasants in the Ukraine, you got to think they're all working for landowners, sort of thing, and some of the peasants would be in charge of the gardens.
Okay.
The Mennonites were in charge of the dairy. So their Veronica was cottage cheese. These others had fruit or vegetables, and that's how you.
It's so cool. It's so cool to hear about. It's all the little things that change just because of what we're exposed to, or where we are and stuff. So
what can we utilize to make work with?
That's I would have never thought of that, because for me, Veronica is just, it's cottage cheese. That's all there is. I didn't realize there was another way of doing it.
That's right.
Pretty cool.
I'm with you on that cottage cheese, though.
Now, and I do know. So today you are here at Aylmer, Ontario, doing the documentary.
Yeah.
But you have plans, I heard, to go to Paraguay and stuff with
there's actually a screening in Paraguay tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not that you're personally, but it's getting screened.
Yeah, I want to go.
That would be so cool.
I want to make a documentary on their journey too. I think it's fascinating. Also, the whole documentary of the Mennonites go to Mexico as well. Fascinating stories.
Yeah, there's different stories. So many stories. It'd be really hard to put it in just one.
Yeah,
one movie.
Like in this thing, we show this journey of the Mennonites coming down the Red River, and they either took a steamship, or they took the Red River cart. And those Red River carts were built by the Métis. And it was like, it was used for the fur trade. They're really slow, but they could carry 1,000 pounds of weight.
Yeah.
So the Mennonites that went to Paraguay, they had those same carts, except the wheels were like 15 feet high because they had to go through jungle and logs, and
they had different environments.
I'm speculating but I don't know why their wheels were so big, but I'm thinking,
Well, do you think that you will pursue some of these other stories?
I would love to. Yeah. I would love to. I think they're fascinating, and it's really been quite interesting. We've been screening this at many, many locations, and we've had many, many sold out crowds. And people have been staying just like today. Yeah. So an hour and a half after the screening, sometimes they have to flick the lights to get people to leave, because they want to talk about the story. And we talk about colonialism. We talk about the Métis and the Indigenous. We talk about the cold, that it was the coldest winter on recorded history, that they survived that year. We talk about the journey across the Atlantic. We talk about, all the whole going through Europe, and people are engaged. And that's probably one of the most rewarding things about this film.
Do you feel like, are you kind of surprised about the response? Like, were you expecting people to respond the way they do, or are you a little bit surprised about the response to it?
I'm first off, when I started, I said, who's going to want to watch a documentary about some Mennonites, wandering around the world, I am very surprised.
Yeah, you didn't expect that.
I didn't expect it. And also, I told the story for the Mennonites, but also for non-Mennonites alike, so that everybody can understand the story and the journey. That was important, that I could go to a broad audience. And I also told the American story to a degree as well. And that was important to me. And so I'm really surprised. But even people not even knowing about the storyline, nothing to do with Mennonites, just like, oh, I want to see that, So it's really surprising to me.
Yeah, it's amazing to see, and to see the interest people have in that. And I feel like those of us who come from Mennonite backgrounds, it's amazing for us to see the courage and the resilience that our ancestors had, right? Like, I love seeing that, and love seeing, everything they went through and they did in order for us to be and be where we are and be who we are.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think that first ship that landed at the juncture of the Red River and the Rat River, 65 families got off of that boat into, as they know, nothingness. Yeah. It was just empty buffalo grass, and it was a whole different world, you know?
Yeah. So you said it's showed in Paraguay today.
Yeah.
Are there other countries where it's going to be screening?
We're talking to Mexico. We're talking to Belize. We haven't locked anything yet. So tell me if you got some people there that you know. Well, let's talk.
Nice.
We're going to be screening it in Germany. A promo for it that I'm making especially for the Anabaptist 500 conference.
Right. Yep.
So I am making a promo specifically for that conference that is going to play in Germany and in Switzerland at Zurich.
Okay.
To promote the film and make some awareness and try to bring the film in Mennonite communities around the world, sort of thing, you know?
Well,
yeah.
Speaking about bringing it into Mennonite communities, have you thought of trying to translate it into Plautdietsch or into other languages eventually, if the interest was there? Because I find, there might be some who really want to see the story, but they may not be able to follow English well enough to be able to follow the story.
Great question. So for Paraguay, we've subtitled it in German.
So High German or Low German?
High German.
Okay.
Which was interesting.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't sure, but they requested it to be translated to High German.
Okay.
So we did a subtitle into High German. I would like to do one in Spanish because I think it would be very interesting that way. We've also had a request by the conference in Germany and in Switzerland for the trailer to be in French.
French? Oh, okay.
I never... What? French? So I'm surprised by that.
Okay.
But I think Plautdietsch would be kind of interesting. I don't know how many can read Plautdietsch.
Yeah. Might be a bit more difficult to read it, but even to do like a voiceover or something. But yeah, it would be interesting because there would be those who are very invested in the story, but who don't speak English fluently enough to be able to follow it.
Yeah.
That's why.
And speaking of voiceover, just a little thing. The guy that did the voiceover on the narration on this film is Paul Gross, great Canadian actor, and he's currently on stage opposite George Clooney on Broadway.
Really?
Yeah.
So he had an amazing voice to do this.
I wanted to do this sort of Ken Burns style of documentary, right? And Ken Burns, the voiceover in Ken Burns is I wanted to sort of emulate that.
Yeah.
Paul delivered it just perfectly.
Yeah, he did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It was a wonderful documentary overall.
Thank you.
I don't think I'll take too much more of your time, but my last question would be, if somebody wanted to purchase this documentary, like let's say they couldn't come today to the screening or doesn't have the opportunity, is this available for purchase?
We have it through the Manitoba Mennonite Historical Society. They have a website, so they are selling DVDs there. Okay. We're also going to try to make it available to other communities.
Okay.
But what we're trying to do right now, first and foremost, we're trying to do community screenings. And then we're going to be doing digital release and stuff like that late into the year. And the reason we want to do community screenings is because it's doing exactly that. It's fascinating because it's creating a sense of community. And that, to me, and to people that have experienced it, even if they're not part of the Mennonite community, it's been a resounding,
it sounds like it's been quite the success. And I think the conversation that comes from that.
That's right.
That's huge. You can't have that conversation if you just view it at home by yourself.
No, that's right. So we're really trying to do community screenings across Canada.
Yeah.
We have Kansas coming up, and we want to spread to other states because there's a lot of Mennonites in different states.
Yep.
As I said, Mexico, Belize, and all those things. And then eventually we want to do a digital global release, a simul screening where people can chat together from different countries all at once. And then we'll do an open digital release after that.
All right. So stay in tune.
Yeah, we got a lot of plans,
All right. This sounds great. Thank you so much for your time today, Dale.
Thank you very much.